to do my favourite books of 2021 today. I've read a lot of books that I really like this year, and these are my 9 favourite books. It really annoyed me that I didn't have 10. I was going to add one, but then I thought, no, this is not what this video is. This is about my favourites, so there's going to be 9. We'll just have to deal with it. We move, it's fine. Before we get into this video, I'm so annoyed. I just sorted out loads of my clothes the other day, and in the video you can see them all lying behind me. I love that for me. It's so ugly, but I really appreciate we can just all collectively ignore that. Thank you. Before I get into it, I thought I really wanted to give an honourable mention to 2 books that I reread this year, which I think I read for the first time in 2019, I believe, I'm not sure, which is both of the Sally Rooney books, Conversations with Friends and Normal People. I've read these for the second time, both of them. I mean, as everyone else, love Sally Rooney. So yeah, these I gave 5 stars to both of them again. But since I've not read them for the first time this year, I didn't want to include them in like my top favourite books of 2021. But these do get an honourable mention for me just because I love them so much and they're so dear to my heart. Also, there's a bit of a weird one. Beautiful World, Where Are You? I've not read this book yet. I'm too scared to read this book. Sally Rooney is, I think, one of my... I don't know if she's my favourite author or not. She's definitely up there. It's either her or, well, you're going to see which one she ties with in a minute. Just building a bit of tension. I'm too scared to read this book. I don't know what it is. Every time I've picked this up, I'm so excited to read this book, but every time I've picked this up, it's like, oh, what if I don't like it? I'm too scared, honestly. But I know that once I will read this book, which will be next year, this will be one of my favourites of the year. So I just thought this is like my prediction for 2022. This will be one of my favourite books this next year. So if I do another video like this next year, I'm very excited to see if this ends up being in that video, which I'm sure it will be, but just, yeah, it's another honourable mention. I was too scared to read, but I'm sure that I will love. Before I get into it, I just want to say that most of these books I read either on my e-reader or got from the library. So I've only got 2 books here actually, which I thought up more of these, but I think when I made this list, I was like, oh my god, I've only got 2 of these books physically here. I need to buy the rest of them. It's just something about having your favourite books physically on your shelf that just brings me a lot of joy. So I think I'm going to buy these after this video actually. The order that I'm going to do these in is chronologically. So the first one that I'm going to start with, I read the longest ago. I read in the beginning of 2021, which is The Girls by Emma Cline. I love this book, obviously. That's the reason that it's in this video. So in this book we follow Evie, and she tells us about her teenage years when she meets the girls, a group of teenage girls that she's fascinated by and that she wants to be a part of, and eventually that happens. She does become part of that group, which turns out to be, well, the Mattson cult basically. I don't think it's ever named as that. I don't think it's ever said that this is a story about the Mattson cult, which is not exclusively, but it's mostly about how she became part of this group, how she perceived the group, and Charles Manson himself. It's very, very interesting how quickly she gets kind of sucked into this, well, cult basically. She doesn't end up being part of what happens at the end of this book basically. I think everyone knows, it's not a spoiler, is it? But as I said, there's another timeline that's more current day, and she's talking about how what happened affected her and what she thinks about it now. And I love the writing in this. I like Emma Cline's writing in general. I've read her other book, Daddy, which wasn't my favourite, but I'm not the biggest short story reader anyway, so that might have played a part in that. But I love her writing, and this is so beautifully written, and you think you're there with Evie. You can really relate to her in a way. And yeah, I love this book, honestly. If you like anything literary fiction, if you like reading about cults, obviously this is the book for you. I love this. The next book that I'm going to talk about is The Most Fun We Ever Had by Lombardo. I love this book. This book was so heartwarming and comforting, also sad, but it was mostly heartwarming, I think. It's a very quiet book, not a lot happens, but everything happens at the same time. This is like a multi-generational family story, I'd say. We follow the 4 daughters of 2 parents, obviously, but mostly it's about the 4 daughters and what happens in their lives. And basically the story starts when we meet Jonah. Jonah is the son of one of the daughters, and she gave him up for adoption, I think 15 years ago. And basically he re-enters their lives. I think a lot of the family members didn't even know he existed. It's about how he brings the family back together in a way, and it's about all of the trials and tribulations of family life, basically. Most of the story takes part over a year, I believe, but it's also written in flashbacks, and we see a lot of how the parents met and when the children were younger. It's such a lovely book, honestly. I love this so much. This is definitely one that I'm going to reread in the future when I need a comfort read. I'm honestly already craving rereading this book. I love this so much. If you want something light but also meaningful, this is the one that I'd go for. I love this so much. The next book that I loved reading this year was Ohio by Stephen Markley. It's been a while since I read this, so my memory's a little bit fuzzy on this one, but I remember loving it. This is, to me, literary fiction at its best. It was so well written. It was so atmospheric. It was so good. Basically, we follow these 4 characters, and for one reason or another, they all end up in Ohio. I think one of the characters lived there, but most of them I think are just visiting or crossing through the town. So if I remember correctly, and I'm not sure if this is right or not, this is just what I remember, I think the story is told in 4 sections. Basically all of the characters has got their own sections. It's all from their point of view. So we follow their lives leading up to this, the reason for them being there, and their stories all cross in such a good way. Honestly, the ending of this book, I loved it. I loved it so much. It was such a good payoff, but also the writing was amazing. It was so well, like, it was very descriptive, but not in a tedious way to read. I did find this a bit harder to read than maybe other books that I've read this year, but honestly, it wasn't tedious at all. I never wanted to put this book down as something like that. I always loved reading it. There's not too much to say about this book without spoiling it or without giving something away. Not that there's a massive plot twist or anything, but I think it was, for me, best to go into this book without knowing anything, and I think I got the most out of it that way. So I would just recommend maybe not reading too much about it, but if you like anything that's very atmospheric, very well written, if you like more character driven books, this is definitely it. It's a bit bigger, it's a bit longer, but I loved reading it. It was so good. My next one is My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa moshfegh. I think I know a lot of people have read and loved this book this year for good reason. This was one of my favourite books I think I read this year. We follow this girl, I think she's in her early 20s as well, very relatable, and basically she decides to have a year of hibernating. I don't know how else to put it. I think, yeah, hibernating. She's got a very questionable therapist who just gives her loads of different pills that make her go to sleep, and she plans to have a year of rest and relaxation, basically, where she just sleeps most of the time, and she hopes to come out of that a new and improved person. I think she suffered a trauma of both her parents dying, which leads to her wanting to do this hibernation, and that's the basic premise of this book. So we follow her inner monologues, her thoughts and feelings about what's happened, and how she's basically not trying to think about what's happened and just focuses on trying to cope with what's happened to her in, well, the only way she really knows how to, which is not doing so, and just sleeping through it. It's very, very interesting. There's also something that happens in the end which I didn't see coming, which maybe I could have seen coming. If you don't like unlikable characters, this is not one for you. She's not very likable. No one in this book is very likable. I don't mind that. I like a book with an unlikable character in it, but if that's not your thing, this is one to stay away from. But this was very, very good to me. If you're a 20-something person, I think there's going to be something that you relate to in this book, which is mostly the reason I like this book. Was quite relatable in a maybe not so good way. But yes, I love this book. Next one is the Pisces. This was probably the biggest surprise I had this year. My other favourite author, which I was talking about earlier in the video, is Melissa Broder. I love her so much. I love everything she does. I love every book she's written so far. I've read everything apart from her latest one, the Super Doom, which is a poetry collection. Not that into poetry, so I haven't read it yet, but I'm sure I will. I love her podcast. When I found her podcast, I binged it, and she's got a lot of episodes, but I just binged it. It's basically like a free therapy session. I loved it so much. Everything she says is funny and relatable to me. I love that woman's head. I worship at her altar. I love her. So the first book I read of hers was So Sad Today, which I think is her debut, which is a collection of essays, and I loved it. It wasn't my favourite in hindsight, but at the time that I read it, I loved it so much. So after that, I read the Pisces, which going into it, I really wasn't sure about. It's basically about a woman named Lucy who goes through quite an upsetting breakup, and her sister goes away and asks her if she can look after her apartment in, I think it's Venice Beach. She's from Phoenix, I think, originally. So she goes there as kind of a new start, fresh page kind of thing. And she's not in the best headspace. She's like a self-diagnosed love addict, and when she does go to Venice, she goes to group therapy, which those were some of her favourite scenes. I loved the group therapy scenes so much. It was really, really funny to me. But yeah, the main premise of the book and why this is called the Pisces is she meets this merman who she kind of has a love affair with. And when I read this, I was like, no, this is not going to be for me. I'm not going to like this. I don't like anything kind of fantastical or just stuff like that. It's just not my cup of tea. But I knew that I would like the writing because it is Melissa Broder. I knew that I would like it, and I did. I loved it so much. It was so funny. It was so relatable. And the merman part is actually not that prevalent in the book, in my opinion anyway. It's more about her longing for love, I think, for someone that she can love, that loves her. I think she just looks for contentment, basically. This book was very, very funny to me, very relatable, apart from the merman part, obviously. I loved it so much. I keep saying this about every single book, I'm aware, but that's one of my favourites. I'm going to pick up every single thing that Melissa Broder writes in the future. And yes, I love her. She's my queen. The next book is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This one was also very surprising to me because this is, I believe, a sci-fi book. I'd say it's quite light sci-fi, but I don't really read that. But I was so interested in it because I love The Martian, the movie. I've not read the book yet. I think I might. I do like things set in space, very interesting to me. And when this book came out, I was just really craving to read something that's a little bit spacey, a little bit sci-fi-y. And I've read a lot of good reviews about this book. That's why I picked it up. It was quite big. It was quite a long book for me anyway. But it was so entertaining and it was so funny. This is what I'm not expected about this book. It was so, so funny. In this book, we follow Ryland, who is, I believe, a science teacher at a school, and he has this breakthrough discovery, and due to just different circumstances, he ends up having to go to space in this kind of last chance to save the world mission. And we follow him as he wakes up in space by himself. All his colleagues or everyone that went to space with him is dead. He's the only one that survived. He's got no memory of anything. So we follow him kind of trying to piece everything together and just save his ass basically, because he's alone in space by himself. It's also told in flashbacks. We kind of see how he ended up having to go to space. But as I said, the thing I love most about this book is how funny it was. It was so, so good. Especially the character of Rocky. I think everyone loves him so much. He's one of my favourite characters I ever read about. He's so, so, so cute. But yeah, this book was very, very heartwarming. It was very, very interesting, quite tense at points. But it kept me very, very interested. And I love an underdog. I didn't think I would like this book at all, but it really came through for me. This was honestly great success. Next one will probably come as no surprise to anyone now, which is Moshfegh by Melissa Broder. As I said, I love her writing. So I kind of knew before even starting this book that I was really gonna like this. In this book we follow Rachel, who is obsessed with calorie counting. She's got all these different food rituals. She basically eats the same thing every single day, which is very comforting to her. She's obviously recovering from, well, actually not recovering. She's in the midst of an eating disorder. So if that's something that you don't like reading about, or that's difficult for you to read about, there's basically a big, big trigger warning on that, because she talks a lot about food and calories and calorie counting, food rituals, food restrictions in this book. So just a little heads up. But she meets Miriam, I think her name is, in this frozen yogurt shop that she goes to every single day. She always gets the same thing, and she always gets it served by the same guy. And one day she goes there and he's not there, and in his place is this girl called Miriam, and she strikes up a friendship with her, which eventually turns into a love affair. So when she meets Miriam, she's fascinated by her and by her relationship with food, and how she doesn't count calories, how she just enjoys her food. And yeah, she's very, very fascinated by that. And we follow her thinking about food differently. We follow, well, basically a big part of this book is Miriam feeding Rachel a lot of things, and she's kind of starting to have a different relationship with food, eating more. But it's just, there's a lot more that happens in this book. I don't want to say anything more, but it's also very funny. Again, very relatable. Just another 20-something woman just struggling through life, having mental hardship, you know. But yeah, very, very, very good. Okay, second to last one is Cultish by Amanda Montell. This is a non-fiction book about cults, why we're so interested in cults, what makes a cult. She also talks about businesses like Glossier or Soul Cycle, and how some of the language that they use is similar to that of a cult, basically. It's very well researched, I think. She's interviewed a lot of people, but it was still very digestible. It wasn't, some non-fiction books can be, I think, quite difficult and tedious to read. I'd also really, really recommend the audiobook for this, which is how I listened to this. I didn't read it physically, I listened to the audiobook, which I thought was really, really good. This book felt very millennial to me, which is very fitting for me. I am a millennial, but this felt, yeah, very current. It's very trendy, but I think a lot of people could really enjoy this book. A lot of people that are my age group could really, yeah, like this book. Also, she's got a podcast called Sounds Like a Cult, where she and, oh God, she co-hosts this podcast with someone else, but I'm really not sure of who right now. Sorry. But if you like this book, you probably also really, really enjoy the podcast. It's very, very similar. They cover similar topics. They also talk about things, businesses, groups, communities that are a bit cultish. It's very, very interesting. But yeah, I really, really like reading this book. And last, but very certainly not least, I think this is my favourite book of the year. And the funny thing about this is that I only just finished this about 3 hours ago, and the book is Reprieve by James Mattson. I love this book so much. On the surface, this is a book about a full contact haunted house where the group can win $60,000 as a cash prize, I believe. The haunted house is made up out of 6 rooms, which they have to complete in order for them to get that prize. They've also got a save word, which is reprieve. And if any of the teammates say the word reprieve, the game ends and they basically lost. So it's also a little bit similar to an escape room. It's basically a mixture of an escape room and a haunted house. In each of the rooms, they have to find a certain amount of envelopes before they can proceed to the next one. Going into this, I thought this book was going to be a horror book, but I really don't think it is. It's more of a literary thriller / social commentary book. It talks a lot about race and it talks a lot about sexuality. We follow a few different characters and it's mostly about their backstory, how they all came to be together at this haunted house, what led them to even go there, and most of the storylines also intersect, which I really, really liked. I thought this was very, very clever. The writing again was really, really great. I enjoyed reading this book so much. It was very, very easy and quick to read. The horror, to be honest, is very few and far in between. There's not a lot of it in this book, and the escape room haunted house scenes, I wouldn't even classify them as horror. They're very, very intense, but that's it. They're not extremely gory, I'd say. If you don't like anything gory at all, maybe stay away from this, but it's really not anything too crazy, I'd say. The reason I liked this book was I really didn't know where it was going to go. Even though you know from the beginning that one of the teammates was murdered, that's basically how the book starts. I was so interested to see the lead up and what happened exactly and how all the characters came to be at this haunted house together, because initially you can't really see the connection. They're not a friendship group, they don't really know each other, most of them. It's so well written, it's so clever. I was so hooked the whole time. I couldn't stop reading this. I was reading this on my e-reader before bed. I literally read this until my eyes physically shut. So yeah, those are my favourite books of 2021. I'm already very, very excited for my reading year of 2022, but I'm also very happy with all the books that I read this year. I read 65, I think, in total, 66, 67, something along those lines, which I'm very happy about. Thank you for watching and I'll see you in my next video. Goodbye.